Bard's Truth with yours truly, the Green Bard. This is Dany's Dragon Bonds, Volume 1, Part 2, The Incubation of an Egg, continuing our investigation of Dany and her dragons in A Game of Thrones. A Game of Thrones, Daenerys 4. Amidst mentions of dragons and dragon symbols in this chapter, Dany has her second confrontation with Viserys, hitting him with the dragon clothing she'd made for him. Embedded in this is a lot of boasts by Viserys about being a dragon, which reminds us of the Kingsblood in the story. Dany also worries about waking the dragon, which leads to her striking him. As if in answer to the idea of waking a dragon, she retires to her chamber to establish a bond with a second egg, this time Rhaegal's, waking it as well in my opinion. Last chapter I discussed how I think that the dream with Drogon had emotional and potentially physiological healing magic associated with it. I lean toward interpreting that the end of the second paragraph in the passage that follows be literal, not figurative. I think she is drawing magical strength from the dragon. Or the inverse, the egg is channeling/lending energy to her.
"I'm not hungry," Dany said sadly. She was suddenly very tired. "Share the food among yourselves and send some to Ser Jorah, if you would." After a moment, she added, "Please bring me one of the dragon's eggs." He refreshed the egg with the deep green shell, bronze flecks shining amid its scales as she turned it in her small hands. Dany curled up on her side, pulling the sand silk cloak across her, and cradling the egg with the hollow between her swollen belly and small tender breasts. She liked to hold them. They were so beautiful, and sometimes just being close to them made her feel stronger, braver, as if somehow she were drawing strength from the stone dragons locked inside. She was lying there, holding the egg, when she felt the child move within her, as if he were reaching out, brother to brother, blood to blood. "You are the dragon," Dany whispered to him, "the true dragon. I know it, I know it." And she smiled and went to sleep, dreaming of home.
The bond that she established with Rhaegal's egg cannot be the same as the mutually exclusive bond of a rider and mount, as is her bond with Drogon. With Rhaegal, her bond would be that of a mother to child. In fact, I read this passage as her incubating the egg, just as a mother hen sits upon her eggs. Recall Jorah's later joke of Illyrio sitting on them himself. Then, as she feels Rhaegal kick, it seems that the babe may have felt Rhaegal awaken in his shell. While we know that it goes nowhere, could this be an indication that Rhaegal may have been starting a bond with Rhaegal to be his eventual rider? I find it a nice touch that George R.R. Martin made sure to connect the appropriate dragon to the boy. Even though this is only show canon so far, I do wonder if that's also specifically why Jon, Rhaegar's son, rode Rhaegal too. A Game of Thrones, Daenerys 5. This is the chapter where Dany eats the heart, resulting in Rhaegal being proclaimed the stallion who mounts the world. There is a lot of dragon metaphor in this chapter, but not a lot of magical evidence. I am of the opinion that a large part of why Drogo wanted to marry Dany was to produce an heir that had a shot at becoming the stallion who mounts the world. Like we said before, he has an ego. I know that it's never explicitly stated in the text, but I think it's a defensible theory because of that. I see some pretty good evidence for that at the end of this chapter. The three main pieces of evidence are: 1. Drogo's lack of staying power, 3 thrusts, his utterance of the stallion who mounts the world just after his moment of pleasure, and 3. his smile of satisfaction once it's clear that she's going to finish the whole heart. It also ties back to Dany's first chapter and what Illyrio said. "She has had her blood. She is old enough for the cow," Illyrio told him not for the first time. "Look at her, that silver golden hair, those purple eyes. She is the blood of old Valyrio. No doubt, no doubt. And high-born, daughter of the old king, sister to the new, she cannot fail to entrance our Drogo." To which Viserys replied, "I suppose the savages have queer tastes, boys, horses, sheep." Viserys clearly never understood why Drogo wanted her, but Illyrio seems confident that Dany, the blood of old Valyria, is exactly what the Khal wants. Could someone, Illyrio himself mayhaps, have convinced Drogo that combining his optimal Dothraki genes and Dany's Dragon Rider/Old Valyrian genes would result in this stallion who mounts the world? I think this highly likely. At the feast afterward, Rhaegar is mentioned again as the Last Dragon, reminding us of Dany's Kingsblood and foreshadowing the return of dragons. Compounding the Kingsblood reference, she also calls herself the blood of the dragon to work up the courage to finish the old 96er. The dragon's eggs come up several times in relation to Viserys wanting them and Dany being willing to give them to him. Viserys compares himself to dragons as well several times before the end, where Dany believes he was wrong.
He was no dragon, Dany thought, curiously calm. Fire cannot kill a dragon.
This is a stark reminder that resistance to heat only goes so far. Still, that she named the dragon from the final egg after Viserys indicates that he may have had a future as its rider. A Game of Thrones, Daenerys 6. In this chapter, Dany is attacked by the wine cellar, learns about Robert's bounty on her head, and has a failed attempt at hatching the dragon's eggs. Before the attempt on her life, at the market, she contemplates that she could live in Vaes Dothrak, if not for her legacy as Blood of the Dragon, thinking that for her, a dragon, it wasn't enough to be the mother of Rhaego, the stallion who mounts the world. It seems that she is taking up responsibility for Viserys' cause, to take the crown of Westeros. This is the first we see of ambition in her. Prior, it has all been about survival. After the attack, she briefly thinks in terms of fear again, recalling the fear of Viserys' mantra of waking the dragon. But now it is fear for the babe. Her motherly instincts drive her to think of the babe as blood of the dragon as well. The mantra again helps her to shed her fear, which she transforms into wrath, deciding that Robert has woken her dragon, which drives her to try to hatch the eggs, a seemingly instinctual act. For a moment, we think that it might work, as Drogon's egg drinks the heat, but it is a false alarm.
No, he cannot have my son. She would not weep, she decided. She would not shiver with fear. The usurper had wakened the dragon now, she told herself, and her eyes went to the dragon's eggs resting in their nest of dark velvet. The shifting lamplight lined their stony scales, and shimmering motes of jade and scarlet and gold swam in the air around them, like courtiers around the king. Was it madness that seized her, then, born of fear, or some strange wisdom brewed in her blood? Dany could not have said. She heard her own voice saying, "Ser Jorah, light the brazier." He bowed as to command. When the coals were afire, Dany sent Ser Jorah from her. She had to be alone to do what she must do. This is madness, she told herself, as she lifted the black and scarlet egg from the velvet. It will only crack and burn, and it's so beautiful. Ser Jorah will call me a fool if I ruin it. And yet. Cradling the egg with both hands, she carried it to the fire and pushed it down amongst the burning coals. The black scales seemed to glow as they drank the heat. Flames licked against the stone with small red tongues. Then he placed the other two eggs beside the black one on the fire. As she stepped back from the brazier, the breath trembled in her throat. She watched until the coals had turned to ashes. Drifting sparks floated up and out of the smoke hole. Heat shimmered in waves around the dragon's eggs, and that was all. Your brother Rhaegar was the last dragon, Ser Jorah had said. Dany gazed at her eggs sadly. What had she expected? 1,000 years ago they had been alive, but now they were only pretty rocks. They could not make a dragon. A dragon was air and fire. Living flesh, not dead stone.
I do wonder if she might have had a chance right then to hatch Drogon's egg, or even Rhaegal's. We must consider that she hadn't yet incubated Viserion's egg. Either way, the disappointment at her failure is sobering to her. She seems resigned that it was a false hope to hatch the eggs. A Game of Thrones, Dany 7. The eggs do not come up in this chapter, but she does think of herself as Blood of the Dragon twice. First, to try to have courage to accept the violence surrounding her in the town of the Lambmen, but very soon after she uses the phrase again to give herself courage to try to do something positive for the conquered women. This compassion is a great indicator of her personality. She takes up the task with fierceness of a dragon, even threatening Drogo's blood rider, Kotho, with "the dragon feeds upon horse and sheep alike," to which
Khal Drogo smiled. "See how fierce she grows," he said. "It is my son inside her, the stallion who mounts the world, filling her with his fire. Ride slowly, Kotho. If the mother does not burn you where you sit, the son will trample you into the mud. And you, Rhaegal, hold your tongue and find another lamb to mount. These belong to my Khaleesi." He started to reach out a hand to Daenerys, but as he lifted his arm, Drogo grimaced in sudden pain and turned his head.
It is interesting that Drogo points out the fierceness she has adopted. It is possible that he is right about Rhaegal filling her with fire. Certainly her protective motherly instinct was roused last chapter. But in my opinion, her growing bond to the soon-to-be-hatched Drogon is an equally likely explanation for the fierceness. Either way, she's coming into her own, asserting herself. Unfortunately, her courage yields a reckless act, where she allows Mirri Maz Duur, a likely enemy, to heal Drogo. I've argued before that even if Mirri Maz Duur's cure for Drogo would have been effective if he had followed her instructions, she surely did not expect that he would follow them. If she had his best interest in heart, she would have prescribed something faster acting and less prone to mistreatment. The hairless men and their hot knives were surely a better remedy in this case. Dany erred. Either way, I don't believe Mirri Maz Duur had Drogo's best interests in mind. A Game of Thrones, Dany 8. She calls herself Blood of the Dragon 3 times in this chapter. First as she confronts Drogo's blood riders about the fallout over Drogo's health, then twice to give herself courage to allow Mirri Maz Duur to perform the blood magic to try to save Drogo. For what it's worth, the YouTuber Glidus has a fun tinfoil theory that discusses the topic of the dragon hatching and discusses a lot of the events of this and the next couple Dany's chapters. I'll not go deep into the blood magic of what happened in the tent with Mirri Maz Duur in this essay. However, suffice to say, I do think that there was a bit of shadow binding going on in that tent. Thus, I agree with Glidus' idea in that I think a small bit, a shadow of the dragon's namesakes, Viserys, Drogo, and Rhaegal, did make it into Mirri Maz Duur at this point, and then into the dragons during the hatching. Either way, check out Glidus' 2 videos on the subject. They're hilarious. That's it for this episode. Join us next time when we cover the last 2 chapters in Dany's story in this volume. They're action-packed. You don't want to miss it. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. Thanks to my wife, the brushed bombshell, who narrated Dany's chapters, and to my daughter, the saxy bass lass, who provided the terrific art of Dany's eggs. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.